Hello, guys. It's Mr. Cole. Again, coming in and talking about the Federal Reserve and how they control and act with the supply of money. So yesterday, I actually recorded that video a while ago, actually before the first day that we were out of break, because I wanted to use my smartboard. So it's been a little bit, but yesterday you should have looked at how the Federal Reserve creates money. Yes, they can just print it, but the way they actually, truly make an impact on the economy is through the manipulation of banks. And you should have seen yesterday that through manipulating some rules and regulations with banks, our banking system can turn a $100 deposit into thousands of dollars worth of products bought through loans. And that's really the power of the financial system. The problem is that when the financial system goes badly, that whole chain reaction can fall apart. But you can see the power that they have in terms of affecting how much money is truly created for people to spend. Now, the reason why they do this is because they are looking at trying to adjust interest rates. Okay? Now, when you borrow money, anytime you borrow money, there's going to be an interest rate attached. Whether it's borrowing money to buy a house, borrowing money for school, they're going to charge you interest. And that is because they need to make money, a profit. A bank needs to make profit off of your loan. Okay? Now, interest rates are a price. They're a price of borrowing money. And like all prices, how are they determined? By supply and demand. Okay? So with this, here's to kind of show you the general supply and demand of money. I don't actually know exactly why supply of money is straight up and down. Essentially, it's because no matter what the interest rate is, there's going to be kind of a set supply. This is how much money is out there. If you just do it like normal, the normal supply curve, life will go on. It's not going to be that big of a deal. But if we look at the supply and demand of money here, okay, here's what it says. As interest rates go down, people demand more money. What that means is if you have a cheap interest rate, people are more likely to borrow money. People are more likely to borrow money at cheap interest rates rather than at high interest rates. At high interest rates, that same house costs a heck of a lot more. Okay? Now, with the supply of money, okay, it doesn't really matter where the interest rate is set at because the Federal Reserve kind of sets where the supply of money is. But just like any other supply and demand graph, these can shift. I'll just shift supply of money to keep it simple. But let's say the Federal Reserve shifts the supply of money left. Well, what that does is it causes interest rates to rise, right? Interest rates went from here to here. Or you can have the supply of money increase to the right, which would cause interest rates to go down. Okay? So with this, the Federal Reserve will manipulate the supply of money to try and affect interest rates. Now, we will get more into the reason why tomorrow. So first thing I want you to do, and this is going to be a big one today, so I'm sorry, is to look at all the ways that they affect the supply of money. Then tomorrow we will get into the why they do it. Okay, so you might be sitting there and go, Mr. Hall, I don't get why they're doing that. We're going to build. So let's first just worry about the supply and demand of money. Okay, now they famously have three tools. Of course, they have more, but we will simplify it down. They have three main things that they do that try to change the supply of money. Those tools are called open market operations, the reserve requirement ratio, and the discount rate. Now, you've already heard about the RRR, so we'll get into that one later on. But let's start with probably the most complex of them, because then once we get this one, this will be easy. So the first one we'll start with is called open market operations. This is the biggest way the Federal Reserve grows or shrinks the supply of money. It is through the Federal Reserve deciding to make decisions on the open market. Do you remember back on Monday how I told you how the Federal Reserve is itself a bank? And banks decide to buy securities of all sorts, right? Banks buy mortgages, they buy bonds, they buy all sorts of financial assets. Well, the Federal Reserve can do the same thing. Okay? So the Federal Reserve will do this to try to influence how much money is out in the market. Okay? So let's say the Federal Reserve wants to grow the supply of money. They want to be expansionary. Okay? They want to grow the supply of money. What they decide to do is begin buying securities, bonds, from banks. Okay? So banks hold these bonds and they hold these mortgages. At the time, right? I can't go to a grocery store and buy an apple with a mortgage, right? Those securities are not converted into cash. Okay? So, in order to get the banks more cash, the Federal Reserve will come in and buy their bonds and buy their securities. Because when the Federal Reserve buys it, what they do is they take an asset that is not cash and they hand the bank cold, hard cash. Okay, now it's all electronic, but you get the idea. So they take an asset and they convert it into cash for the bank. Well, now the bank has extra money. And what do banks do with the extra money? They lend it out. Okay? And so the supply of money has grown. Right? Now, on the other hand, there may be times where the Federal Reserve thinks it's best to shrink the supply of money, to contract the supply of money. When they want to do this, when they want to take money out of banks' hands, they'll do the exact opposite. They'll take their securities, they'll take their bonds, and they will sell them to banks. So when the banks buy the bond, they are getting an asset, but they are giving up cold hard cash to get that asset. And so as a result, the banks have less cash on hand, which means they have less money to loan out. So let's look at that on our chart again. Let's start with the expansionary policy. So I'm actually going to change the color of this line to blue. So then that way, there we go. That way we can compare. Okay, so let's start here with this line over on the right. It's just going to annoy me. Oh, geez. Close enough. All right, so Federal Reserve wants to grow the supply of money. They decide to buy bonds. Okay? Buy securities from banks. When they do this, okay, they give the banks cash. The banks give them the bonds, which means the banks now have more money to lend out. So the supply of money has shifted to the right. Okay? When the supply of money has shifted to the right, if you look, this has caused interest rates to go down. Okay? Now, let's say the Federal Reserve wants to contract the money supply. That would be over here. They just do the opposite. They decide to sell bonds. That is depicted with the green line. When they decide to sell bonds, they give the banks the bond. The banks give them cash, meaning banks now have less cash on hand to lend out, which causes interest rates to go up. Okay? This is the fastest way. This is the way the Federal Reserve does this. Currently, the Federal Reserve is in heavy buy bond mode. They are buying any asset from banks. I mean, we're talking, they're giving out free money. I mean, interest rates are literally basically down here to zero for banks. With all of the extra loans that banks are giving out to small businesses, the Federal Reserve has backed all of those loans. So with that, they're basically buying up bad loans from banks and giving those banks the cash to then give out more loans to businesses. So we are currently in a heavy buy bonds mode, which has driven interest rates extremely low. Again, we will talk about why tomorrow. Okay? That's probably the trickiest one of these, okay, about how they have done this. So we're going to move on to the other two. I know it's a long video. I'm sorry. Ultimately, by the way, what they're trying to do, and I kind of said this already, they're trying to lower interest rates, okay? And the interest rate they're trying to lower is called the federal funds rate. You do not need to know this, but they are trying to adjust interest rates is ultimately what their goal is doing, okay? All right, we've already learned about this one, okay, the reserve requirement. This one's pretty simple. As banks are supposed to hold on to more money or less money, it makes it pretty simple about what they can loan out. So let's say banks are told to lower the RRR. So let's say the reserve requirement was 10% and now it's 5%. That means for every $100 in the bank, they used to have to hold on to 10 in their vaults and they could loan out the other 90. Well, now they only have to hold on to 5, meaning they can lend out $5 more. Once again, if we pull up this chart, okay, this would be over here, lowering the RRR, and this would be raising the RRR. Okay, so look at our blue line. All right, when the Federal Reserve lowers the RRR, banks now don't have to hold on to as much. They can lend more money out. They have more money to give out in loans, which causes interest rates to go down. On the other hand, if the Federal Reserve decides to raise the RRR, let's say they decide to raise it to 20%. Okay, what that would do then is that would say for every $100, now you have to keep on $20, which means now you only have $80 to lend out. So as a result, there's less money to lend out, which causes interest rates to go up. Okay? All right, and then the final one, you guys are doing a great job. The final one is what's called the discount rate. This one always gets people. I do not want, just ignore the name. Know it as the discount rate, but don't even, I don't know why it's called the discount rate. There's no reason for it. It messes people up. Just know it's called the discount rate, okay? This is the interest rate at which the Federal Reserve charges when it lends to banks, okay? So when PNC Bank needs money from the Fed, they have to borrow the money plus interest. And that interest is called the discount rate, okay? The Federal Reserve sets this amount, okay? They can make it whatever interest rate they want. Now, here's what they do. When they want to slow banks down, when they want to take money out of banks' hands, they raise the discount rate, okay? They make the interest rate higher. The reason why they do this is what they're incentivizing banks to not have to come to them, okay? Banks don't want to have to borrow from the Fed. In a perfect world, a bank would never have to borrow from the Fed because their assets would be so good. So when the Fed raises the discount rate, what they're telling banks is you better be careful because if you come to us to borrow from us, we're going to hurt you. We're going to hit you hard and it's going to suck. You're going to lose money because of this. Okay? So they basically are sending a warning message saying you need to be safe. Quit lending out as much money. Keep some of your money on hand so that way you're going to be safe. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if they want to grow the supply of money, the Federal Reserve will lower the discount rate. This is a signal to banks that, hey, we have your back. If you give out bad loans, we will let you borrow the money from us to make up for it, and you're going to be fine. You're not going to pay any interest rate at all. Okay? It's kind of we're on your team. We're on your side. We'll help you out through hard times. So basically, they use the discount rate as a way to signal banks what they want to do. Let's go ahead and look at it here on the chart, and then we'll be done. All right, let's start over here on the right. Okay, this would be lowering the discount rate. Okay, and this would be raising the discount rate. All right, let's look over here on the blue line. Okay, so let's say the Federal Reserve lowers the discount rate. They are telling banks we have your back. If you make bad deals, if your loans foreclose on, if your loans default, it's okay. You can borrow money from us and stay afloat and we won't hurt you. Okay? So as a result, banks react by pumping more money into loans. They give out more loans, which in turn drives interest rates down. Okay? Now, let's say though the Federal Reserve wants to lower the money supply. They want banks to stop lending out as much. Okay? They will raise the discount rate. They will say, banks, if your loans default, if you give out bad loans and people can't pay them back and you got to come running to us, we're going to hurt you. We're going to hit you hard. So as a result, banks get scared. They don't have the backing of the Federal Reserve as much, so thus the interest rate raises. Okay? They don't lend out as much money. They quit giving out as many risky loans. Okay, as you can imagine, in the current recession that we are in, the Federal Reserve's discount rate is essentially zero right now, right? They are telling banks, we have your back, keep giving out loans, we will protect you. And that signals for the supply of money to go to the right, which drives interest rates down. As you can imagine, interest rates right now are extremely low. Okay, banks are basically borrowing from each other and from the Federal Reserve at about 0%. Your mortgages are in the 3 to 4% range. We're extremely low because of these actions. Okay, alrighty. I know that was a lot. This is some of the hardest stuff we do all year. Okay, keep it up. You guys are doing a great job. I'll be available for questions all week. Okay, all right. I'll see you guys.